we've come down the hill from St. Peter's Church and from the preacher stone there, sermon stone, traveling across the trails. Now we've come down into the site of, I have to tell you, Ross, when we were climbing up the hill here, I didn't know what to expect. I thought we were going to the top of a mound and that would be it. But instead we've walked into the site of the earliest known Christian church in the world.
Persecution of early Christians didn't end with the crucifixion of Jesus. There were still the others in the group, people such as close family and Joseph of Arimathea, who took him down from the cross. They had to find somewhere to go, and with the Romans persecuting them, if you look at a map of this period, the whole Mediterranean was within the Roman Empire. To leave the Roman Empire, you'd have to go outside this, and the natural place was Britain. Especially when you look at the earlier records of the migrations, such as in 500 BC, where some of these people, Hebrews, sometimes referred to as lost tribes, came to settle in Wales and became part of, or actually became, the Cymry, as Wales is still known. So if you're fleeing from the persecution of the Romans, the natural place to go would be where your kinsmen were, outside the Roman orbit. And that was in South Wales. And the stories there, the records, the British records, and many others, show Joseph Arimathea set up his first church here in 37 AD, which would make it the first Christian church in the world. This is a site we visited with Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, who's across from Canada, where he has a very successful channel, and he comes to a very different approach where he goes through the Hebrew side of things, the Hebrew records, and follows the history of the early Christians that way. There are a few areas where we might have different views on, different opinions, but it was fascinating to talk to this really sort of charismatic and passionate person, a great talker, and how much common ground we found in the middle. Because if you follow the research from whichever direction, this is where it ends up. The services nowadays are open air in a circle, and you can still see it today in a place called Llan Ilid, which is Saint Ilid, the church of Ilid, who was Joseph of Arimathea. Now this should be a tourist or visitor site of international proportions. It should be on the United Nations World Heritage Sites list, but there's nothing there at all. So what you have to do is look for Llan Ilid Church, L-L-A-N-I-L-I-D, or St. Ilid's, as it's still known to this day. Ilid was the Welsh name for Joseph of Arimathea, as we'll discuss in the video, coming from Galilee, end up with Ilid. So when you get to the church, if you can find the church, it's no problem. Just to your right, you'll see a little path. Follow that path round, and up you go, and it just looks like a hill. When you get to the top, it's amazing. It's a circle, it's like an amphitheatre. You can imagine the people standing around the edges, or the congregation in the middle, while the great Joseph Arimathea would preach about his first-hand experiences of early Christianity.
We're here again. I'm here with Ross Broadstock here, and we've come down the hill from St. Peter's Church and from the preacher stone there, sermon stone, traveling across the trails. Now we've come down into the site of, I have to tell you, Ross, when we were climbing up the hill here, I didn't know what to expect. I thought we were going to the top of a mound and that would be it. But instead we've walked into the site of the earliest known Christian church in the world. Now, if you look around, when we were talking at St. Peter's, we talked about the fact that the original church would have been round, not square.
Yeah.
Because this was the practice. Now, in the Welsh, you call this the core.
A core, yeah, it's a circle, that's right, yeah.
A core, a circle. And we know that we see evidence of that in Fortress Babylon, which is now in Cairo, where the original church was round.
Oh, wow.
And the studies have shown that the tabernacle, the tent of meeting that was created by Moses in the wilderness was also round and not square.
Really?
But the teaching is, of course, rectangle, square, all this
Yeah,
other
I
stuff.
hadn't thought, yeah.
And that is not true, that actually it was in the round. So the practice in the first century would be to be consistent with that roundness. Now, before we go on to talk about this, let me just give a little bit of precedent for that. I've been at the site in Corinth, ancient Corinth, and in ancient Corinth, there's a Greek section and a Roman section. And our guide said to us, they believed that they had found an artifact in a particular area in Corinth that indicated that a certain building was the synagogue.
Okay.
And as you walk through the streets of Corinth, you can see that the living quarters were, of course, in the ancient world, very, very small. You'd have a family of four sleeping in a room that was maybe 12 by 12.
Right.
And that was the whole house.
This way you needed to slide down in, right?
And so every building in Corinth is square or rectangular. And of course, the Roman buildings are all that way, but so were the Greek buildings, with the exception of one building, which right to the east, the inside of the gate to the right, there is an oval. That oval is where they found the marking of the synagogue.
Wow.
So the synagogue was oval. And when you go to the ancient city of Capernaum, which is Capernaum for everybody else, when you go there, you'll see a site that comes under a building, and they'll tell you that's St. Peter's house. But it wasn't St. Peter's house.
Okay.
That was the ancient synagogue.
There's a worship place.
And it's in the round. And then you come out from that, and then you have all the houses built in little rows there, very small houses, maybe even smaller, 10 by 10 maybe.
Right.
And they're in rows there. And then you have the Roman 3rd century synagogue up behind it. For all those of you who have been to Capernaum, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are. We come to this site. We crest the top of the hill, and this is what we find. Can you give us a little circumnavigation there, Shane, of what we see? And what we see here is a mound that has been constructed, because we're in a flat mound. This is a built mound, and in this built mound is in a circle, and even to this day we find a certain flatness in the middle, and a circle here. So this would have been consistent with the church. Now, so what's the history of this particular mound? What do we know?
Well, the story is that if you go through, it's supposed to be the last year of Tiberius, which would be 37 AD, Joseph of Arimathea, and then the survivors, if you want to call it that, after the crucifixion, what happened to a lot of the people in the near group around Jesus that had come to their kinsmen in Britain. Which, you look at the map of the Mediterranean at the time, Roman Empire, where the persecution was taking place, covered all the areas apart from Britain, because the arrival of Claudius is not till 44, and some people say, Alan Wilson would argue, part of the motivation for the Romans actually invading Britain was to wipe out this early Christianity. But, you know, that's hypothesis. What this comes in there is that this is supposed to be typical of the old early Christian or British apostolic Christian worship places. It says a circle, and it's sort of work out, it looks like an entrance over there, and there's a high place then where presumably Joseph, or Ilid as he was called, as in, it's interesting because you talk about the root of the words with Galilee and stuff. Well, that makes a lot of sense what you said, because the name Ilid is supposed to come from E of Galilee. As you say, this makes more sense where you say it. You drop the Galilee and it becomes Ilid then.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because when we talk about he of Galilee, right? So the area when you see in English you see Galilee, but in the Ivrit or Hebrew, it's Galil.
Oh, there we are. That makes much more sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
And quite often what you see is that first consonant dropped. So, for instance, when we talk about the tribe of Issachar, for instance, in America they call themselves the Shakari, because the E at the end is a possessive, Shakar, right?
Right.
And so Issachar, when you call yourself up that first is dropped and you become Shakari. So those who were named after Isaac, they would drop that and they became known as the Saaka.
All right.
And so in Georgia, in the Caucasus, they became known as the Saakashvili, the sons of Saaka or Isaac. But in Germany, they became known
I
as
see.
the
The eye has gone.
Saxons.
Right, the eye has gone from Isaac. I'm with you now. Right. Okay, yeah.
And so here
That's
again
what I'm
we see.
picking up on that.
So if we drop the G from Galil, we see Galil, he of Galil, Ilid, he of Galil.
Oh, well, there we are then. That solves that mystery, because the Galilee to Ilid seemed a little bit of a slight stretch to me, you know. But not impossible, but I didn't understand the link. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And of course, the Galil is its own thing. It means what? The circle of the Jordan. You see, it doesn't mean a harp-shaped lake. It means the circle of the Jordan. So actually, the Galil is down where ancient Qumran is now, Kiryat Qumran, and it's down there. And this is where John the Baptist baptized. The Dead Sea used to come all the way up there at the circle, the mouth of the Jordan, the circle of the Jordan, Galil. Okay. The other side of the Galil is where Sodom and Gomorrah, the 5 cities of destruction, were found.
Right.
And they were found in condition like Pompeii.
Right, we can still see what was going on.
Yeah. And so here probably...
Well, in those days, they say there's always open-air worship, and it ties in... This is where it gets difficult to know for certain, but the old Druidic faith and ways of worshipping and Trinity and all this kind of stuff seem at some point to have intermingled with early Christianity. And one of the things which Arthur is supposed to have done is completely reconcile between the two, between the Druids and the early Christians in the the 540s, something like that. But in this period, the early period, they would have worshipped outside, and the Druids always worshipped outside. You've got to be seen by God, so you wouldn't worship at night, so you wouldn't worship under a roof.
There are some theories about that.
And it ties in with the stone circles as well, you know.
Well, yeah, like Stonehenge.
Possibly Stonehenge. Yeah. I think that might be an astrological.
That has its own connotation. Yeah, a calendar connotation.
But just strictly for worship basis.
But we know now scientifically that to walk on soil barefooted is
grounding.
To ground yourself, right? And to ground yourself, and by grounding yourself, you take all that static electricity that's built up in the body and it releases. So there is something to the organicness, if you will, of that outdoor worship. And of course, the Druids are completely misunderstood. I mean, look, the myth in the United States, give you an idea what people think about the Celtic people and the Druids. Right? Druids were tree-worshipping human sacrificers.
Yeah.
And the Celtic people were people who used to run around naked and attack people stark naked and scream and behead all their neighbors. Right? I mean, this is the story you get with no other justification, no other, discussion.
Well, the Roman accounts do it. What's really frustrating is people always refer to the Roman accounts of everything. But most of the Roman accounts which describe Druids, there's about 12 full accounts. None of those people had ever been to Britain. They had no experience at all. The only one of the writings had some experience through his father having been a commander on Julius Caesar's campaign when he got kicked out of Britain, and he wrote some soldiers' tales, and his son rewrote them. Apart from that, none of those people have been any first-hand experience at all, and that's the only historical references people ever use.
But what we do see,
they say the British own record is nothing like that at all. Nothing at all.
Nothing like
it's
that.
About the eternity of the soul, and it's about life being a journey of knowledge and understanding and faith and these kind of things.
Well, Shane and I have talked a little bit about the Druid stuff, and Shane has contributed great understanding. But there's a couple of critical points. One is the eternity of the soul. Okay.
Yes, that's a massive point. Yes.
Yeah. So when you talk about an essential concept, right? That's an essential theological concept that is totally embossed, if you will, in the Christian or in the Hebraic faith.
Yes. And the Romans do refer to that because this is why they were always astounded how fearless the warriors were, because they seemed to have a complete disdain for death. Because all it would do is put them on the next step of their process. And if they had a good death, it gets you a bit further up, a little bit similar to the Hindu moving up to the levels, the reincarnation, your soul, you can't kill that, stab away, This is what's so demoralising for the Roman soldiers. We went up against that.
Yeah,
because
it's a fearlessness. It's a fearlessness. Yeah, and also, my understanding of the Druidism is that there was a concept of vicarious atonement. That you could be atoned, you could be atoned by a vicarious means.
Yes. Well, this is where you get into the... I think there's a couple of stages leading up to that. Is that if say you've done a capital crime like killing someone or something, and you handed yourself in voluntarily handed yourself in and confessed, that was a good thing. You could be executed, but your soul would be released. If you were captured without confessing or surrendering, you had to be dragged in, if you like, and go through a trial, then you might well have a gruesome death, and your soul would be sort of damned. Where the vicarious thing comes in, and the story with Jesus ties in, was so easily accepted by the Druids. as well is that the story ties in so well that in this instance, Jesus had not done the supposed crimes, but he still handed himself in and taken the punishment that the criminal should have done. So this is when this is why it becomes an easier concept for them to adopt. It's not exactly the same, but I think that'd be what we were alluding to.
Yeah, it's very close. Now, there's also discussion about whether or not the Druids were Jews or the tribe of Judah. Now, is there anything in the record concerning
Well,
that?
this is the big thing. The 500 BC migration to here is known. It was always taught in the schools. It's always accepted for hundreds of years that this is the lost tribes. Now, as Al Wilson's joke, they never lost. They knew exactly where they were, but this is where they came. And this is why, after the crucifixion, whatever your view of events there, if you're fleeing from Roman persecution, you go to where your kindred people are. This is where the kindred people already were. And this is where we tie into those things. I was asking you more about SN and things like that, because they're working out exactly how the Druids tie in with the Christianity is a difficult thing, you know. It's not something I'm an expert in at all, you know. It's that's the area that's interesting.
And you have some. Well, there's a couple of things that took place there, if you will, because there is a couple of migrations of Jews that it stems from the two brothers, because you have Judah the father, and he had twin sons, Zerah and Perez. Now Zerah was he broke the matrix. He was the first one to break the matrix, i.e., his hand came out. And the midwives tied a red string
sorry, with you now, before
around
the
right hand.
So you know who's the firstborn, right? Okay.
Then the hand withdrew and Pharez was born. Well, traditionally they are marked in symbolism as the red rampant lion for the house of Zerah and the golden rampant lion for the house of Pharez.
Right.
Okay? So it's very possible that there was this house of Zerah, which had actually populated Cadiz, Spain, and up the Ebro or Hebrew River, if you will, named after Eber, in central Spain. And so you have the house of Zerah already in Spain. And so it would have been very easy for this house to have transferred up into the.
Well, in the migration story, they do talk about, some obviously going to Etrusca and Rome and the Italian connection, but also some stopping off in Spain. Now, whether or not they joined people who were already there, which would fit in with what you're saying, or they were the first day, whatever. Because it always amuses me when people say, well, I've had my DNA tested and I've got some Italian in me, or I've got some Spanish in me. And it's like, no, you probably got the ancient Assyrian in you. And some went there, and some went here, and some went there. It's the same way. There's people with the same DNA as me living in New Zealand. I don't have New Zealand blood in me. You know, or America. I don't have American blood in me. Just because you find the DNA in other places. It's not a timestamp on DNA, is there? You know, the sequence is difficult to work out.
Yeah, and
connections are easier to spot.
But
so that would be a possible connection. Yeah.
In this document that we published in the Sefer, there is a 29th chapter to the Book of Acts.
Yes, this is interesting, isn't it? Yes.
Okay, and so this 29th chapter, which is a controversial chapter,
very controversial, yes.
But it's called the Sonini manuscript. Sonini apparently found this manuscript in the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople.
Yes,
he brings it back. The French Revolution is on. He's fears for his life, so he sequesters the manuscript in Ireland from the 1789, 1785 until it is finally translated into English in 1887. Then, for the first time, they find out there's a 29th chapter of the Book of Acts.
Right.
And in this book, it says that Paul meets the Druids, and the Druids tell him, "We are of the house of Judah."
Yes.
And he gives them a kiss of peace and then moves on. Now, when we see these concepts, and so this is kind of the thing, you have the kind of evidence that we look to try to determine.
Okay.
Is there anything here? Because
plenty, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah,
the lion I was telling you about, the lion stone and stuff.
Yeah, the lion
of Judah. You know, the lion.
The lion of Judah. Yeah. You're talking about the line that pointed to St. Peter's Church, right?
It points to the glow, to the ark,
to the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
And so we're in Wales, so we can't go and see the tomb of Jeremiah that is, allegedly to be in Ireland. The tomb of Jeremiah.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. Yeah.
And allegedly he brought the pillow over, the Jacob's pillow, which is
the stone of Scone, which is in Scotland, yeah.
Right. And so we have these kinds of things, these kind of connections, but it gives us an indication that there were, of course, people coming in here, 500 BC.
Oh, definitely.
600, 700 BC.
Definitely. And the tin trade and everything, there was a lot of going way back. At least 1500 BC, people were trading tin, goods, there's all sorts of stuff. Massive amount of travel going on.
There was also the Druidic belief system that it was only a temporary movement for a coming Messiah which when early Christianity made its way into Britain, was then the transition from the Druidic system of belief into that apostolic Christianity, which you were mentioning earlier, Ross, that King Arthur reconciled both of them together.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be, there's still the difficulty, of course, he had as well was by that stage, of course, you had the Roman influence coming in as well, so you try and reconcile everything. It gets more tricky for him, isn't it? Yeah.
And whilst we were also in Caerphilly Castle yesterday, Dr. Pigeon, there was also the coat of arms of the Ferez and Zara.
Oh, the lions, yeah.
We saw both the red rampant lion and the golden rampant lion on the coat of arms inside the castle.
I think they say that's Llewellyn, I think, don't they? Something like that.
Yeah, and so
which is the lion, yeah.
But the thing is, when you look at this, what you don't see is barbarism. What you don't see is you don't see the worship of Ishtar. You don't see Hinduism. You don't see Buddhism. You don't see Taoism. You don't see Shintoism or Confucianism. You see this idea of an eternal soul, and you see this idea of vicarious atonement, right? And we see and a condition of the soul after death, right? That you could be subject to damnation or you could be subject to eternal redemption, right? When you're talking
in some ways, I think there's more a case it is, well, I mean, it's similar. I don't think it is the same, but it's got similar. Some of the essence is similar to Hinduism. I mean, the idea is your soul keeps returning in a new living being, so you can go down the evolutionary train, if you like, to a slug or something and come back as a high-level person. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on Druidism, but it's just the reading I've done on that. They seem to have a reincarnation view of an eternal
and believe it or not, there was some reincarnation. In fact, there's aspects of Judaism that still embrace reincarnation. We in the New Testament gospel, you have this phrase that appears in the epistle of the Hebrews to the Hebrews that says a man is appointed once to die and then to face judgment, right? So it gives you an idea that the soul is one, it's an individual thing, and you have one process on earth. And that's reinforced in the book of 4 Ezra as well, talking about what happens on earth in this lifetime and what the soul faces afterwards. But it is true that an unrepentant soul is going to face damnation. The soul that says, I didn't do it, try me.
Yes, repentance is important, yes.
But the soul that's repentant and turns himself in, that soul is going to have redemption, right?
Yes.
But at any rate, so as we stand here talking about these interesting concepts, it's very obvious to me that this was a man-built area and that it was built in a circle. And for all we know, because this is soft soil, this may have accumulated and this may have been much deeper.
Good point, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And the trees are very new, as we were commenting.
Yeah. And other examples of Christian cores would absolutely suggest that too.
I hate the fact that it gets planted over.
Yeah,
and it's supposed to be a circle of stones around here as well, possibly.
We'll be visiting Caerleon very soon, which is a perfect example of what a Christian core in early Christianity would have looked like.
But this would have been a Christian core, and the interesting amount, the history that you understand about this place is that this place is circa 36, 37 AD.
Yeah, or shortly after, yes. Yeah.
And that it was created by Joseph of Arimathea.
Yes, or yes. Well, the name and the church across there, again, is St. Ilid's Church. It's still called St. Ilid's Church to this day.
Yeah, St. Ilid. So and Ilid, of course, is taken from the man of Galilee.
Yes.
Which would have been Joseph of Arimathea.
Exactly, yes. And there's numerous references for that. I mean, absolute numerous references of Joseph coming here and everything. The only confusion has been this, the Glastonbury hoax.
Yeah, the Glastonbury hoax.
Which is maddening. It was exposed about 900 years ago. They need to build a new roof. They needed money. They transported stories in. They tried to. They took up some bodies and tried to say it was Arthur. They tried to take the Joseph of Arimathea. The church is founded in like 940 something, and they're claiming people were buried there 900 years before the church even existed. It was a swamp. It wasn't an island. It's anyway.
Interesting.
No, it's a pertinent
We'll continue our
point,
discussion. We'll continue our discussion when we get to some of the other sites.
The middle now, mate. So what are you thinking there? This would be the spot for the preaching.
Yeah. So we're standing here in the middle of the core here. And so we can see a natural entrance that came up this way.
Yep.
And so this was, I think, probably a little bit deeper. There's sediment here on top, and of course,
it's very soft, isn't it?
Landfill. But so this was probably lower. But so the people would come in. Now, typically the way it worked is you would have the men come in, and then the women would fill around the periphery, because of course, it was not a woman's place to talk in the Kehillah. But then the teaching would be, the common practice of the teaching would be you'd have probably a Torah reading, but what would take place fundamentally would be the teaching of the gospel. So the gospel message would be presented. Now here Joseph of Arimathea, Saint Elid, would be standing here saying, I knew him. I watched him. These are the events that occurred. I took his body down from the cross. I put him in the tomb. And after I put him in the tomb, these three ladies who are standing here with me, Miriam, and Miriam, were there as witnesses. They came to the tomb was empty. The Roman soldiers that were watching the tomb were executed because they had seen nothing. And it was after that we had this glorious ascension proved when he walked among us again. And he walked among us for 40 days. And we talked with him, and we ate with him, and we shared with him. And at the end of the 40 days, his ascension on this earth was done, and he ascended from this earth. And the testimony was weak, and the testimony was wimpy, and the testimony was full of cowardice and fear. And all of his disciples, who were called to be bold and brave, hid in rooms in Jerusalem saying, we don't know him, we don't know him, we don't know him. Until he came to them and said, look, I'm going to leave, and then this Holy Spirit is going to come upon you, and it will come upon you, and then you will be bold. Then you go to Jerusalem, and you go to Samaria, and then you go to the very ends of the earth to give this message. And so now, here I am, and of course, we know that what took place in Jerusalem was miraculous, but these Herodians that call themselves Jews, these Benjamites who call themselves Jews, these Jews who call themselves Levites, despised the man. They killed the man. They rejected their king, and they told us, should we proclaim his name in public again, that they would kill us too. And James the Just was beheaded, and some of the other teachers were beheaded and murdered. And so we left. Why did we leave? Because I know these isles. I've been here many times. And I've come back here, and this is where I have come back, and this is where we have gathered, and so this is where we are. And so we have formed in the synagogue where we will learn the teaching. We will learn the teaching of Moshe. We will learn the words of the prophets. We will learn the words of David. We will learn the words of Solomon. And importantly, I will impart to you the words of Yahusha Ha'Mashiaj.
Well, I have to say, the site itself I found very spiritual, very emotional place. And with the power of Dr. Pigeon's preaching as well, it was an amazingly spiritual place, and I highly recommend it. Please go and look for St. Ilid's on a map near Bridgend in South Wales, and see what you think. And there'll be more from Britain's Hidden History soon, and from Dr. Stephen Pigeon.